Kort jy nog van my? Okay, because I can do this for days. Oh, that's a wise man right there. Okay. Okay, so the door is closed. I assume we're locked in and you have to listen to the talk now. Yeah, like, this is a bait and switch. I'm going to talk about something else. Okay. You guys should let me know. Am I live already? Oh, sorry. Cool. So I don't know whether it was communicated, but I will keep my Slack open as well. So I think that's primarily for the people joining online. But rest of you guys, you can either ask me in person or you can just leave a message in Slack in the track 5. So I will maybe just stop every now and then, check if there's questions, and get to them. Someone asked, we live? I assume yes. Okay. Okay, cool. So I want to talk about web components. Whenever I do a talk, it's just, I think, really good for me to get a sense of kind of who I'm talking to. So I'm curious who has heard about web components before. Okay, quite a lot more than Cape Town. I think Cape Town, there was like 2 people. Who's used web components before? Oh, okay, all right. Ooh, okay. I hope you're ready to learn a lot of new introductory stuff. Relearn it. All right, so, and the kind of, who here are front-end developers? Okay, back-end developers? Okay, cool, so most developers. All right, cool, so yeah, let's get this started. I have a lot to cover, and on that topic, so I kind of do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of teaching as well, and there's definitely a pattern in terms of when I start talking about something. So when I start talking about something, it's always great to start a talk with a disclaimer, and a warning. This is a warning. Usually I don't have much content. I start around like a 30-minute talk or whatever. And then, as you learn more about the thing, as you get more examples or whatever, like your content just grows and you kind of reach kind of a peak where you're like talking about 3 hours straight about something. And then obviously you kind of want to kind of refine it, like bring it down a bit and so forth. So last time I spoke about this, we were just under 2 hours. So when I submitted this talk, I also didn't have any idea how long the actual slots are. So I think also if I was planning on covering a lot more, but unless they want to give me a second slot, we can only do so much. So fair warning. So in terms of this entire process, that's kind of where my brain is. So I'm kind of around the 2-hour mark. That is kind of where I need to be in terms of time. So that means, I've kind of cut some stuff out. I've kind of reduced the scope a bit. That means I might actually like not cover some things that someone might feel like, why didn't he cover that or whatever? It's because I'm still busy with that process. I'm kind of only now starting to kind of cut it down and make it like a 40-minute talk. So if there's anything you wanted to know about specifically that I didn't cover, I'm going to try my best to leave time afterwards for Q&A. So we can really have a discussion around web components. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had, but also come chat to me afterwards. Like find me during lunch or whatever. I'm super keen to just chat about anything related to what I'm speaking about here. Because believe it or not, I'm also still in the process of trying to figure out, where do web components really fit into the ecosystem of the web? And I don't necessarily think there's a very clear answer to that yet. So, I love having discussions around it because it helps clarify it for me. Cool. So quickly, let's chat about this guy. Who is he? So I do quite a bit of teaching and training, done some work for Stellenbosch, Witwatersrand, place in Norway, lots of places in Cape Town. So I think when I saw this hall, I was like, man, this is like my space. This looks like a lecture hall. I was joking with Rob last night and I said I should just kind of refrain from kind of the muscle memory of just yelling at people, hey, you, listen, or whatever. And he was like, totally do it, dude. And I'm like, no, this is going live. So, yeah. If I do it, it's because Rob made me do it. Cool. I'm also pretty involved in kind of community space. One of the admins on ZA Tech. Who here is on ZA Tech? Really? Just two? Okay. If there's one thing you take away from this talk, go zatech.co.za. I think we're up to like almost 14,000 members now. It's just a general Slack workspace for everyone kind of in the tech industry in South Africa. Also kind of one of the co-founders of ZA Product Design, which is kind of similar, but within the world of product design, UX, UI, those type of things. And then also I'm one of the co-founders of Front-End Development South Africa as well. So FEDSA, so we actually have a hackathon coming up this weekend, which Justin is going to be running by himself. I was just like, dude, like after this week, I just want to go lie and watch Netflix. Cool. My background isn't actually in tech. So I studied visual arts. I used to be an illustrator, used to do exhibitions and stuff. But, you know, it's a tough living. It's really hard to kind of scrape out a living as an artist. And I kind of grew up with like GeoCities and like that whole like Dreamweaver, Microsoft front page. So I've always done like kind of web stuff on the side. And then, you know, I was like, hey, this stuff is a lot better to do. I enjoy it more and whatever. And, you know, that's kind of where I started going. I was kind of at the right place at the right time, and I just kind of rode the wave kind of as front-end was becoming a thing. Because when I started with it, it was very much like it was something a designer did. There wasn't even something like web design. So you would be a designer, and you do a website in some way. You do a flyer or a poster, Photoshop it up, slice it, tables, there we go. And I think because I don't have a formal background in this field, I'm very much involved in the community, very much involved in the open source community as well, like to have some pull requests for all of these. Yeah, because that's essentially where I kind of learned a lot of the stuff that I know today. But I also do contract work. I've done contract work for Google Foundation, Design Indaba, lots of other companies. Oh, and National Treasury, unfortunately. Also very involved in the civic tech space, so kind of the space kind of exploring the intersection between technology and civic engagement, civil society, those places. All right, and I also do have a life outside work. This is me, it's my wife. That is my 6-month-old baby, which tonight I was able to sleep in a hotel room, not sharing with a 6-month-old baby. I have mixed feelings, despite my love for her. I really enjoyed not waking up in the middle of the night, but I do miss her dearly. And then also, I really make it a point to kind of destigmatize kind of mental health, mental illness and stuff as well. I have a very long background with like kind of depression and things, and I think I've always kind of sometimes mentioned it in passing in my talks, and then people would always come up to me afterwards and chat to me. And, you know, I just, at one point, I was just like, you know, this is like something that comes up so much when I just mention it that I'm just going to kind of include it in my actual talks. So even if you don't want to talk web components, if you want to talk about the experience of like struggling with mental illness and stuff in the tech industry, also come chat to me. I've also done several talks on that topic. Started on Ciprelix 2014, also Venlaw 2017, changed my life. Yeah, so more than happy. Maybe that's a talk for next year, but we'll see. Then I'm all over the place. There tend to not be that many Schalk fenters on GitHub, so you can probably just search for me. If you were looking at like some agricultural like marketplace or something, that it's probably pretty crowded with Schalk fenters, but in the tech world, pretty easy to find me. All right, enough about that. So what do I want to do? So we have about 40 minutes, probably 35 now after that. And I want to kind of talk about web components. What specific problem are they solving? Why do we even have web components? Why is it even a thing? Then I want to talk about the underlying technology, kind of because web components isn't a specific technology itself. It's kind of an umbrella term for lots of different technologies. I have mixed feelings about whether those should have been bundled together or whether they should have just been treated as separate technologies. Sometimes I feel they should have just, the shadow DOM, custom elements, all of those things, kind of not try to put it under a single banner. But there is a lot to be said about hype, on the web, HTML, CSS3, all those things, even Web 2.0, there is something to be said about like having some big banner that you can kind of rally around in terms of a group of technologies. And then I just want to do a demo quickly where I get to kind of doing a button in web components. You might be thinking like a button, why are we just doing a button? But that's kind of the point. Like, things can get really tricky very easily on the web. And you might think this is very simple, and you're spending 2 days, and like, this button isn't done yet. And I think web components help us kind of address that, which is kind of in the world of state machines and state charting and so forth, is called state explosion. In other words, you reach a point where every new thing you add to it, every new color you add, every new state, it just balloons. And now you're having like a 2,000 line file of CSS just for a single button. All right, let's go. This took me like half an hour to do, so appreciate it. Okay, so anyone know who this guy is? Sir Tim Berners-Lee. I used to have a lot more success when I asked that question earlier in my career. Nowadays, most of my students now were born after the year 2000, which is just like, but like I get some very interesting answers. I think someone once asked if it's my dad. And I think growing up with the web, that's not too far from the truth. But yeah, he's the guy who essentially created the internet. If you were to summarize it very briefly, it's obviously more complicated than that, but so he also created the very first website, which is essentially what is the World Wide Web. It is still online. You can go to that URL, and it still looks exactly the same way it looked when he actually created it. Nothing broke, all the links work, everything that insecure, like HTTPS thing, just like really, I don't know, bothers me so much, but HTTPS wasn't a thing in that day. But there's something to be said about that, and I think that's one of the defining characteristics of the web, that it's adherence to this radical backwards compatibility. And I think in some ways we're now heading up against some problems because of that. But you can't really get away from that. Like, you can't create a website and not know whether next year they're going to change how divs work. Maybe tomorrow they decide, you know what, divs, unordered lists, unordered lists. When you put something in an unordered list, it's no longer going to put it underneath one another. Now it's going to be be a carousel and go through the items. Good luck browsing the web tomorrow. So you don't really want that. But having this backwards compatibility, this radical backwards compatibility, does come with some problems. Because especially with the web wasn't created for the way we use it today. It was originally created as a way to serve up academic documents. When Mosaic, the first graphical user interface browser, was released, people thought it's redundant. Why? Because only academics and really people within the tech world use the web. So why do you need anything apart from a command line to browse the web? And they thought the regular people aren't going to use the web. But, that's obviously us being here. Even my slideshow is on slides.com, so that didn't turn out to be the case. But because of this radical backwards compatibility, this is always the world that we come from. And we have a lot of things that we can't change in terms of a web, an HTML that was originally created for this purpose. And all my students always ask, can you do a talk about Web 3? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't even want to get into that. But to me, the real big thing was Web 2.0, in my time on the web. And it kind of just changed everything. It kind of rethought about the way we use the web, not necessarily as a read-only platform, kind of like a digital brochure that you kind of get information, but as a means of software delivery. Now we started getting things like social media and, YouTube, where you upload things and you have user-generated stuff, you know. We started getting into the world where the type of things that were being served to us in the browser were more the type of things you would have like 10 years ago, not 10, let's say 20 years ago, brought at incredible connection on a CD with a manual. And now you go to like a URL and you get, you know, Trello. Imagine Trello came out 20 years ago. It would have been something you need to install on your computer. And, you know, like this notion, like already started, people started picking up on this. And, you know, this lady was the first person who coined this term like Web 2.0. And she said essentially, you know, the web as it was known then was kind of a fleeting thing. And the web is moving into a place where it's going to be started to be used as a software delivery platform. You know, and like we see a lot of this today, you know. As I mentioned, slides.com, like even like this presentation itself is HTML and CSS and JavaScript. You know, Trello, who uses Figma? Anyone here use Figma? No, man, what's wrong with you? Figma's amazing. Yeah, dude, don't even get there. I love Figma. But, you know, like the recent developer, what is it? The front-end development survey or something. I'm thinking about the design one. If you look at the market share of like Figma and Sketch and XD, you have like XD and Figma and Sketch and all of those things like down here, and Figma is just like skyrocketing. So whether you love it or not, it's just like taking over the world. And, you know, I come from a time where, like, those type of things, the web ones would be kind of the knock-off, the second grade one. And now we're in a place where the one that you visit on your website is the canonical one. And the ones where you need to download and install it on your operating system is kind of like the one that people are like, no, I'm not going to use that one. Even with Google Docs, you know, like how many people now use Google Docs that used Microsoft Word 10 years ago or LibreOffice or whatever? Yeah. But I also want to kind of, always when I do this talk, I'm always very careful that I don't, it doesn't come across that this is the only way to now build webs, use the web. You know, primarily the web is still used as a means for like read-only content, as a delivery medium for articles, you know, blogs. Just look at the market share WordPress has, you know. But there are some of us that are kind of in this world of building software for the web. Let me also just check the time. All right, we're about halfway. So, but like also that results in like any conversation on Twitter about the web. This was, I think, earlier this year or end of last year. I don't know if anyone remembers this. Was about that TikTok widget thingy where you had to embed like a button that if you clicked it, it fired a navigation request to the browser. And people were like, why not just an A tag? We already have this functionality. Why are you recreating it in JavaScript? Yeah, I don't even want to get into that. But like, I think like that was like a 3-day Twitter flame war about a button. So, you know, this is where we are. And I don't know if he's here, Xander, but like is he here? Oh, but so he has a really great quote that I stole from him where he's like, when he started out working on the web, no one knew what the web was, and everyone was asking one another, like, what is this web thing? What do you do with it? And like now, like 20 years later, people are like, no, let me tell you what the web is, and let me tell you how you're doing it wrong. So, you know, that's kind of, so yeah, and I think it's because like the web has kind of fragmented in terms of what you use it for, but there is a very big use case for software delivery through the web. But the reality is those of us that are in that space are kind of like still in this kind of awkward phase where we aren't really there yet, and we're kind of in between kind of this idea of the web as a software delivery platform and the web as kind of like a way to serve up like things that you read or view. And in academia, you would call this a liminal space. So in other words, you're kind of in between two things at the same time, and because of that, it's very confusing, it's disorientating, like, and so forth. We have first-hand experience with this as humans, kind of being teenagers, where you're between the world of a child and the world of an adult, and it's confusing and weird and awkward. One of these might be me, it might not be me. Yeah, so that's kind of the same thing, you know. So you can think of the stage that the web is in now at this point, kind of being kind of in the teenager phase, you know, where it's kind of growing into an actual software delivery platform, but the tooling is not there yet. Which is why, you know, you can't have talk about web components and not talk about frameworks. Because, and I think a lot of things that came after ES6 or after the success of ES6 ended up kind of being almost a victim of its own hype. Because ES6 was just so widely successful that, you know, whether it be like responsive images or, you know, web components or whatever, everything that came after it just like almost drowned in its own hype. And because of that, a lot of people are disappointed with web components because they thought it was going to like make frameworks redundant. And I don't think that is what web components were ever intended to be. It's definitely not what the consensus is today, what it is intended to be. A lot of frameworks, even like Vue and like Preact, Lit, and so forth, they actually use web components under the hood as kind of primitives. And I think that is the thing. Web components are meant to be primitives that you can assemble in whatever way you want. But the drawback of that is that there isn't necessarily consensus in terms of what you do with these things. So W3C was essentially like, we know you're trying to build software. We know it's hard with kind of like this document model of global styling and, you know, like purely declarative markup and so forth. Here's some things that might make it easier, but I don't know, figure out what to do with it. So I think the talk after me about you, so I attended it in the Cape Town one, and I was sitting in the front, and someone was like, oh, look at the non-framework guy here sitting in the Vue talk. Like a real talk, like all my work that I do is React. I do React day in, day out. I don't think web components are at the point yet where like the type of projects that I work on, that scale, where it's kind of has the same level of maturity as something like React. So I just want to get that out there. Like, but there are projects where web components work really nice. And I want to get a bit into what those are. Okay, cool. So let's quickly get to web components as an umbrella term. I'm going to do a very quick demo, but I just want to give you guys like a bit of a broad overview of what I'm going to be showing. So I mentioned web components is the umbrella term. Like it's kind of a term for three different things. It kind of covers something called custom elements, which I'm going to demo now. HTML templates, honestly, I don't find HTML templates that useful. Come talk to me afterwards if you have a really great use case for it. I don't know, like I've tried to kind of play around with it. To me, it feels like it gets in the way most of the time. I can see it being really useful if you have like a very strong server-side templating language that spits out like actual HTML from like a server-side templating, and then you just, the JavaScript just eats that and turns it into a web component. But the type of things that I build is kind of mostly built with JavaScript. So then kind of it's like kind of then going back to HTML and turning it into a template and then consuming it again feels like a bit of a roundabout way. But like that's just the stuff that I work on. So, but I don't want to speak too much on it because I'm definitely not an authority on HTML templates. Then like something that I think is a lot of times very confusing to a lot of people is the shadow DOM. I want to talk a bit about the shadow DOM, what exactly it is, and so forth. Then there's two things that aren't officially considered as part of web components that I like informally consider as part of it. It's very hard to talk about web components by not talking about these things at the same time. One is ES modules, which you might already know. It's kind of that import syntax where you say like import whatever from this file or so forth. A lot of you might think it's a Webpack thing. A lot of you might think it's a React thing or an Angular thing or whatever. It's actually a plain JavaScript thing. You can create a JavaScript file now and use the import syntax and actually import modules, and it's going to work. Then also another big thing is constructible style sheets. I think constructible style sheets are really going to change the game when it comes to web components. Unfortunately, it's not kind of production ready yet, so I don't want to touch too much on it. But if you want to read up a bit more, definitely have to look up constructible style sheets. It's really going to kind of really improve our process, kind of supercharge web components. But yeah, I don't want to get too much into something that isn't production ready at this time. Cool. So let me do a quick demo. And I think maybe before I get into that, let me just check if there are any questions. Figma's amazing. Thanks, Robert. Okay, so mental health issues. Do you have any recommendations for developers who are trying to? Cool. There is a really great resource called Open Sourcing Mental Health. I will share it in the Slack channel now. Definitely check them out. OSME, I think is the acronym. How do I get to the website? Oh, there, it's OSME Help. So the only caveat being they have really great stuff. They have a podcast as well and so forth. The only caveat is it's obviously very US based. I would love, I just don't have time for anything anymore. I have a 6-month-old baby. But I would love to do a South African one because it has lots of great stuff in terms of kind of your rights, as an employee and what you can in terms of sick days and so forth. Obviously, this is very US focused, like legislation and so forth. And as they have actual resources for for the actual executives, for employees and so forth. They also have actual research surveys that they do and so forth. It's great stuff. I don't want to get too much into that, but check it out. Some of it's very demoralizing if you just see kind of how little progress we've made and how things have gotten worse with COVID, but that is a talk for another day. But definitely check that out. Cool, all right. So yeah, if you have any other questions, you can ask them in Slack. I also want to just maybe ask some questions here, but let me just get to the demo first, because I would be very disappointed if I at the very least don't do an actual demo and show you guys how to use this. Cool, so let me just open this in CodePen. So I did it in dark mode at the Cape Town one, and some of the other speakers came to me afterwards and they're like, listen buddy, we need to get you on light mode for presentations. But I don't do light mode. So to me, I just feel so out of my comfort zone here. Cool. So obviously you guys know native elements, like an A tag. Ooh. And buttons and those type of things. So I think to me this is actually a very good use case for web components. Because as a designer as well, I know that oftentimes from a design perspective, from a UI perspective, we tend to treat these things, we don't necessarily make a distinction between a semantic button and a semantic A tag. Some people would disagree and say visually they need to be distinguished, but a lot of times, semantically, you have the same visual device whether you're navigating to a different page or you're actually performing an action with JavaScript. So to me, I often find that whether it's web components or React or whatever, I find it useful to kind of abstract those two different things under kind of a general button, that I just use and that determines for me in the background which element semantically makes the most sense. So let's create it. So let's do Schalk button and click me. So obviously the web doesn't recognize Schalk button. Not today at least, maybe something like that comes out tomorrow. So now we can use custom elements. This is where custom elements come in to create that custom element. And all of this is just raw JavaScript, raw HTML, no libraries, no Webpack. You can literally open up an index HTML file, JavaScript file, import it, and all of it works in most modern browsers. So first and foremost, you need to register it. So you can just go, so it's on the window. So you can just go custom elements. I prefer to just be explicit and go window, custom elements, define, and let's do Schalk button. And now we need to pass it a class, okay? So let's just take a regular vanilla, so we go class, and let's just do Schalk button, extends just a regular HTML element. Oops. And then we just good practice, run the actual constructor on that. So if that element, I don't think HTML element has anything it does in the background when it gets kind of initiated or constructed, but it's just good practice to run super, that just if there's anything in HTML that needs to run during the construction, it just like automatically runs it. But you'll see there we have click me, Schalk button, click me. So we just created our own custom HTML element. It doesn't do anything, it's just like a plain HTML element similar to a div or a span or whatever. But already, this is pretty amazing. If you've never done, oh, we actually haven't created it. Sorry, my bad. There. So we just need to register it. And this is pretty amazing. If you've never done something like this, you can create your own HTML. Okay, this already opens up a lot of cool things for us. So even if we inspect it, you can see there, Schalk button. Okay. But obviously we want to do something with it. And so I'm also going to be talking about the shadow DOM in a second. But so the shadow DOM, it has kind of its own encapsulated DOM that's kind of separate from the actual main DOM. So you can do encapsulation, scope, styles, and so forth. So I generally just in the class, I do this, and you can just do attach shadow, and then just the mode. I always do closed. Closed essentially just means you can't with JavaScript go into it. And then you have something called connected callback, which is just essentially when it gets added to the DOM. And let's just do something simple. So let's just this shadow in a HTML, and let's just do div, whatever that is. Cool. Wait. There we go. There's our Schalk button. It just overrides whatever I give it and just outputs like random. So just having this already is pretty amazing. And we can even inspect it and you can see there is the element, and you can go into its actual, so this is what the actual light DOM has, but you can go into the shadow DOM and you can see it's closed, which means you can't access it from outside, and you can see what the shadow DOM. So obviously now, if we can even just get rid of this because it doesn't take that into consideration. There you go. We've created our own HTML element. Okay. So back to our original use case. So let's just say by default it's a button unless you pass an href to it. So let's just say google.com. Unless you pass that to it, then it turns it into an A tag. Okay? So that's pretty easy. So what we can do is we can just check the attribute. So we can say const, so href, just get this, get attribute href onto the host. So the host being this. Just checks, hnref. Okay. So then we can just do, if it has an href, then do the shadow. Let's also just include click me there. And then it does a link. And we can even use template strings, template literals, to even just do this. And let's just put the href in there. Okay. And then obviously the shadow in HTML, otherwise just do it as an actual button. Okay. There we go. Whoops. Click me. Sorry, my bad, guys. Like I said, this light mode, it really throws me. Okay. What? Line 12? Oh, Earth. All right, guys. This is why I come here, to make a fool of myself. Yeah, that's why most speakers don't do live coding. But I don't have that much self-respect, so I open myself up to that. Cool, yeah. Okay, but what we can do now is we can start actually kind of unifying the style here, because obviously we want them to look the same. So here's the part that really grosses people out at the moment. and which is why constructible style sheets are going to be such a big thing. At the moment, like the most common way to do styling in the Shadow DOM is inlining styles, okay? But one thing to keep in mind is that, let me also just put it outside. So I actually put it outside my component to just ensure that I don't change it. Because if the browser encounters the same style, inline style, it actually dedupes it. So what's nice about that is if you have 20 buttons and they all have the actual same like inline style, at the very least the browser kind of, at the very least just recognizes, oh, this is the same style again. It's already in the, what's it called, the OCSS, or the CSS-OM. So the kind of DOM version of the CSS, and it doesn't parse it. It's like, oh, I already have this. But to some people, that's little consolation, and they're like, no, this sucks. I agree, but you know, it's the only way to do it at the moment. And you know, it also just sucks because we're not used to it. You can import CSS files into web components, so you can go like in here, and you can like have your link href. Don't do that. You're going to fire an HTTP request every time that component mounts. That's bad news, and you're going to have a flash of unstyled content. So it's going to have to download the file, and it's going to show your HTML without any styling. Yeah, don't do that. Okay, trust me, guys, this is not that bad. Okay, so let's just add class, and let's just call it element, or whatever. You can call it button. I just call it element, otherwise I get confused with the actual thing itself. And let's just do element, and all right, let's go quickly. Let's background, let's just go blue, color, white, font size, 1 rem, and I also obviously need to actually include this for it to show. And padding, 1 rem, text decoration, none, and so forth and so forth. I'm not going to have complete parity right now because obviously I don't want to spend 10 minutes of my talk doing CSS, but just to show you the principle. So you can get it like, so you can just provide this to your developers. Just tell them to use Schalk button. Please remember to also call it Schalk button. No, please don't. Call it like custom button or whatever. And they just add a href if it goes to a link or whatever. They don't even need to understand what's the difference between a button and actual a tag. So you can do that. And then another cool thing is you can actually, in your styling, you can actually do, so a common thing is to have like different versions, to have a secondary and a primary one. So you can do importance primary or importance secondary, or you can just have it be the fallback. So I'm not actually going to add it to the top one. And then in here, you can just go host, and you can just check. You can go importance primary element. So let's just say it doesn't have a background unless it's set to primary, so background none, and color blue, and then color white. Let's see. Okay, obviously I need to add borders and whatever, so let me just add 1 pixel solid blue. But you know, already there, now we have even like, and this is just plain HTML, you know? Now you kind of have this, you don't even need React or whatever. And yeah, I wanted to show some more things in terms of events and so forth, but I quickly just want to finish up the slides, because I think we're out of time. I might just take 1 more second. Cool, native elements, you know, and web components, you can also, the custom elements, do it with create element as well. It's kind of treated as first-class elements. Yeah, constructors, so you have these native constructors, there's loads of them, and then this is what I just showed. You can create your own one. You'll note that you always need a hyphen. The reason being there are no native elements that have hyphens. So the W3C has said they're never going to add an element that has a hyphen. So all custom elements should have hyphens. So this means that if the W3C tomorrow decides they need a Schalk button, at least they are not going to use a hyphen, so it's not even going to conflict. So if you can call your web components whatever, it'll never conflict with native elements. But that means it needs a hyphen, otherwise it's not going to work. It's going to give you an error. Yeah, all about the hyphen. Shadow DOM, DOMs within your DOM. Kind of a bit similar to iframes. The big difference is just iframes serve entire sites, and you can't really modify them that much, whereas the Shadow DOM is built to actually be tweaked and knobbed and whatever. Yeah, the reason being it allows you to abstract a lot of low-level stuff. So you have a Shadow DOM, and then you can have like these. You have a light DOM and a shadow DOM. So in other words, this is where the term comes from. It's essentially you have these elements, and then you have that shadow part that's hidden from the main light part. ES modules. So you guys probably know script tag. If you're old enough, you remember like this being a mess. You might even not know that you can do imports, which means you're still here. But so we looked at ways to create more modular systems in JavaScript. So started exploring AMD, was a mess. Then with Node, got CommonJS, and it worked so well that we kind of looked at Browserify as a way to port it to the browser, and now we have ES modules, which is native, but just a lot more beefier. It allows you to do these type of things. You might not have even known this is actually just raw JavaScript. You can open it, you can do it right now in your browser. Which means like with web components, this really supercharges web components because now you can do this. You can create a file per web component. Some cool things to check out, webcomponents.org, really cool. You can even publish like custom web components that you create here. You can see like even like some design systems, like Adobe has some stuff you can search for. Like their slogan is literally, there's an element for that. So you can look at cool web components that other people created and just like actually pull it into your site. GitHub does a lot of, GitHub is built with web components. Adobe creates a lot of stuff with web components. You'll actually be surprised like how widespread web components are actually on the web. But yeah, this is great. There's a Slack channel and whatever as well. There's this also, awesome lists. If you guys are familiar with awesome lists, this is the one I usually use, but there are a couple of web component specific awesome lists. And then lastly, you might know lit, you might know hybrids. These are, get out of here. Okay, no, he just told me my time's up. 1 second. Lit is kind of like a very low level, like framework built by Google. You don't need a build process. You don't need Webpack or whatever. You just import it, and it just abstracts away some things of web components. And then also hybrids, which is kind of like a more like React type approach with like hooks and whatever. Both of these you can just import from a CDN into your runtime. You don't need an actual, you can, in any site, you can just pull in the script and you can do all of this. Stencil is also worth checking out if you're interested in that. Cool. So, I was lying. I'm going to just 1 more second. So, I just want to quickly show you guys. So, one problem that I often encounter, I'll upload this to the GitHub repo. So one problem that I often encounter is that when you create something simple and you want to create demos for it, documentation for it, you need to account for all the different states that it can be in. So your actual HTML starts looking like this. Okay, so this is BEM. But then like what Web Components does, it allows you to abstract away a lot of that low-level stuff. So you can actually, so this is, I did this quickly this morning, and this is, oops, this is not, this is not what I wanted. I think I broke it. Let me check. I was playing around. Yeah, this was actually me just fooling around. But I will actually, let me just quickly see, view demo. Did I, yeah, okay. Never mind. I will, okay. Sorry. It's because I was playing around with service workers and stuff. That's why. Just a reload. There we go. Cool. So here we have our component, and like we can just like toggle toggle some properties, medium, large, and see all these combinations. Primary, secondary, how does it look when it's loading, so forth. And this is our documentation. And like this is all just like plain like JavaScript. I wrote this in like 5 minutes. All right, cool. That's the end of it. Come chat to me afterwards if you have any questions. All right, cool.